We're at a good spot to start. First of all, I'd like to thank everyone for taking some time out of your day to join us. I really hope that this is an educational but meaningful 30 minutes. With that said, we do have about 30 minutes scheduled for today, and we'll be talking about the modernization around the warehouse. Now, we are joined with a special guest, John Wirthlin, today. Just to let everyone know, John and I were going back and forth, and we thought instead of giving you kind of that boring PowerPoint where we're going to go slide by slide, we are going to do this more podcast style. So, John, I lied a little bit. I did make 2 slides, but we won't kind of kill everyone with the slides. It's going to be more kind of question and answer to get some insight. So
that sounds great, Seth.
Awesome. I'm going to go ahead, and this is the second slide. So it's really light. It's just a quick agenda, just so we can all follow along. So everyone knows kind of what we're going to discuss today. We're going to do some quick introductions. We're going to talk about modernization of the warehouse. What does that include? But more specifically, what kind of steps? And then the big one is, how do we keep this success? How do we achieve this? And then how do we keep it going? So with that said, again, my name is Seth Fike. I'm an account executive here at Scanco. I'm seeing some names, a lot of you in here. If you haven't worked with me, you probably will here in the short future. But the exciting person is John. John, you're an industry expert. I read your background, you and I have talked, and really excited to get your insight. So can you give me a quick introduction of who you are, kind of some of your experiences in the warehouse, and then, maybe just some examples of what modernization of a warehouse is?
You bet, Seth. Well, thanks for having me, and I appreciate our relationship with Scanco. So I'm the industry principal or subject matter expert here at Zebra for manufacturing, transportation, logistics, which includes, a heavy emphasis on warehousing. So just a quick background. So I actually started my career in the Air Force as a medic way back in the mid 80s, and I was going to school for IT, and then ended up in medical logistics. So I learned about inventory control and those processes, and we were doing things with pen and paper quite heavily. So, the focus of this, was really around small and medium-sized businesses. So, very familiar with that sort of approach. I've been in, different entities within IT, the infrastructure and application development, and now my role is really to understand our customers and the industry, where the industry is going and how our solutions align to the industry and what those trends are. So, your question about modernizing the warehouse. So really it's about how do we take our 2 things. How do we meet labor challenges, and how do we meet increased customer demand? And in a small and medium-sized business, you're up against the Amazons of the world and the Walmarts of the world and things like that. And it's really about, how do I take the 10, 20, people that I have on a shift and maximize their efficiency? And what we're seeing is a movement, away from, hopefully pen and paper, and more towards, using mobile devices, using scanners, using tablets to get the right information in our hands to those edge workers so that they can, do the job more efficiently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's interesting because a lot of times, I go into these conversations, and labor challenges is one of the biggest ones, especially the last couple years, as we can all imagine. Not enough people to work, not enough people that want to work, and then how do we get the most out of our current employees so that we can start benefiting? And I want to use that word, kind of benefiting. So thinking about that, I use this word strategically, tangible. What are some tangible benefits, that these small, medium-sized businesses that are trying to compete with an Amazon can expect when you are, talking about modernizing and getting to a point where you're getting off of paper and pencil?
Yeah, well, I think it all comes down to warehouses are big places, right? Everybody understands that. And trying to do something with paper and pen. I remember, being in my environment when I first started, we printed out a pick list at the beginning of the day, and it was pretty fancy because it was in row rack bin and order. So I went and serpentined the rows of the warehouse, picking for that, those particular customers, and then delivering them. Well, that works in some cases, but I think right now is, with the advent of different modalities for delivery and ordering, that paper pick list that you print at 8 o'clock is is out of date by 8:05.
Hmm.
So we really have to figure out how do we connect that worker, to really what's going on within the business. And that's where, mobile computers, tablets, things like that are giving those edge workers, up-to-date information on what they need to do then, and kind of allowing them to cut the umbilical cord from having to go back to a workstation, and traverse, 10, 15 miles a day because you're going back and forth doing what you need to do and then going back and entering that information into a system of somehow to tell the ERP system, yep, I received that pallet in, or yes, I picked that order. How do we allow our users to do that in more real time? And so we're seeing, those sort of things happening prolifically as the pandemic again puts stress on our labor force. And like you said, Seth, these companies are maybe more, small business, small, medium-sized business, have some niche, products or services, but a lot of times those products and services are also, being offered by the big guys.
Yep.
So, their ability to be able to compete with that is really relying on this technology that we're talking about today.
Yeah, and I really like the use of cut that a bit umbilical cord. A lot of times I think of, using mobile computing as a extension of your ERP. It's you keeping them out of whatever system you are, but also, not cutting that 15 miles that you explained to 7, 2, or just getting them and keeping them working. So I'm really interested to hear kind of, you dove into it a little bit, but some of those improved efficiencies, what kind of, when I'm talking utilizing zebra scanners and I'm using technology like this, what kind of improved efficiencies are you typically see? What kind of reduced costs? Do you have any numbers or overviews, or what can we expect to see when we're talking about this?
Yeah, I don't have any numbers per se, but the big thing, like you said, is how do we connect that worker to what's going on? Um, you know, Reducing the number of steps a worker has to take is something that, is I think is first and foremost when we talk about this segment of our customer business, right?
Hmm.
Um, I'm struggling to think of exactly, a specific instance.
Hmm.
But I was actually in a larger facility, and they were still printing out at the beginning of the shift, or as they were going through the picking, they were printing out a piece of paper with a barcode label on it and taping it to their assets so they could put it away. And what was interesting is that you know they had the technology to put on the forklift so that people could be connected, but they just hadn't met that leap. So I think,
Hmm.
something that I want to make sure that the audience understands is that, this worker initiated transactions that we see, most of our customers in is really the norm. When we talk about more advanced, solutions for more automated data capture, we're certainly
Hmm.
seeing the market move to that, especially if that's what you need in your particular swim lane, if you will, to be more competitive. But it doesn't mean that you need to. I mean, a lot of small and medium-sized businesses are fine with barcoding and collecting the information with mobile devices. I think one of the things that I'm also seeing is that, not only having the mobile device or the scanner, but also having, tablets and forklifts and things like that on those type of devices, so that again the worker can concentrate on doing something safe and be able to, still be efficient. I'd say the other thing, Seth, that I see an increase in is a lot of times customers will have kind of an RF gun style where
Hmm.
they'll scan an item, get some direction from that screen, and then put that item down and then interact with the asset, moving a box from a shelf, to a pallet or something like that. So what I'm seeing is a lot more movement toward more wearables and, like ring scanners, so that, or even, something that's on top of a glove, to be able to allow that worker to engage that asset, and still be connected, but not have to put, things back and forth. So I've seen, 10, 20%, increases in productivity just by looking at those sort of initiatives.
Yeah, and I would kind of echo that. Even, the companies that I'm working with, a move towards tablets specifically and wearables has just been a
Mhm.
big initiative for most companies, especially as you kind of said on the forklifts. I have a bigger screen. I don't have to put something up and down. It's just it's fixed mounted there. I can see it. I have all the visuals I need, and I can do my job. And that's ultimately what it is. Do your job and be kind of directed to where you're going to go, how you're going to do it, so that you can be as efficient as possible. So
Right.
that resonates a lot. Now, with that said, going into kind of our next piece here, that's a really good zoom out, but what are some steps that we can put into place? So, what are some, we're talking about paper and pencil for most of the companies that we're talking to. So what are some steps that we can either get ready, or if we are already implemented some kind of mobile computing, that we can start to think about, scaling that to another level to start competing with those big boxes and those bigger companies?
Yeah, well, I think, depending on the capabilities of, their back-end ERP systems, a lot of small and medium-sized businesses and even large businesses in some cases are running their, some of these processes with spreadsheets still, right? So
Mm-hmm.
having you know, engaging with a WMS provider is something that I would certainly recommend. And some of those don't have to, you don't have to spend millions and millions of dollars. There's WMS providers that are on a subscription plan where not only can they help to take the orders and interact with the order management system and transportation management systems, but they can provide that execution layer. And a lot of them are interacting or have their own applications, Android applications that would run on the tablets and the handheld devices, in
Yep.
order to make that. And I think that's so important, Seth, is that those applications are simple, right? They're not,
Mm-hmm.
all right, I have a 5-inch screen. Let me give you the whole WMS on a Safari browser. It's, hey, go do this now, take this asset and put it here, right? And tell me
Yep.
that you did that. One of the things that we came out with about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, was a top of hand kind of small Android mobile computer called a WS50. And it's actually a full functioning mobile device that has a scanner integrated into it and a small screen with basically 2 buttons. So we can provide very simple instructions to a worker that says, you know, click this, tell me you did it, yes or no, and then move on. And it
Mm-hmm.
really does help to provide, more efficiency because the worker's not having to look through everything and trying to find what to do, but it's very directed. And I think it also helps with not only that, but also retention and recruitment of new workers. As you
Mm-hmm.
said, the labor shortage is a real thing, and trying to find labor is difficult. And depending on your area, those devices can be in different languages. And again, the simpler you can make it for your worker, the quicker they're going to be productive. I was in an organization several years ago, and they were literally starting like 40 or 50 people a week just because of the turnover. And that was,
Mm-hmm.
right at the pandemic. And now what we're finding is because of this automation and even like, some of the things we're doing with robotics is just, you have Bill and Susan and their friends, and then one works at one DC and one works at the other DC across the street, and those folks talk. And they talk about the technologies that they're using, especially with the younger, generation. I'm old. I start saying younger generation. It's pretty bad. So, but my son, who's almost 21, he'd rather engage in those type of tools versus having to work with the paper and pencil or the green screen systems. They're just not. It's something that they don't want. They don't want to engage. They want to engage in a more familiar platform. So again, that would be how I would start is, engaging with those providers, those software providers that can provide those capabilities to make you more efficient, as well as the presentation layer on those mobile devices that the labor of today is comfortable with.
Yeah, and I would echo that, using, especially with the conversations I'm having here at Scanco, a lot of the companies utilizing us start as kind of a scaled approach. It's, hey, I just want to, get better at my physical counts. I want to improve some picking. And then they start to have conversations with me and some of my team members of say, hey, how do we break this out? And it's really funny you said that, because 9 times out of 10, they are a younger generation that comes into the business and says, okay, we've had this for 5 years, but it looks like it can do a lot more. And how can we do that? I don't want to hire 5 guys and have them say, hey, what locations do I need to go to? The gun should tell me. That's the basics. And that's kind of
Mhm.
the status quo. And how do we get to a point where the status quo for a business using paper and pencil is now just mobile computing, and ramp up time goes from, hey, it's a 3 month to it's only going to take 14 days. I think
Right.
I think utilizing software in the appropriate hardware is going just plays such a huge benefit to those labor pieces, as we've kind of talked about it. So I do want to take a quick pause. We're about the 15-minute mark, halfway. We're a little over it. To ask any questions, I do want to see if there's any questions that you have during this to kind of do some live Q&A. I see a couple already. I was going to wait till the end, but we'll jump into them now. John, I'm going to throw this one over to you. Specifically, this is for the food industry. We are in the food industry. We are tracking things on paper and pencil. So I think that follows along. What sort of things should we prepare or look into when it comes to automation? Right now, we're doing everything on Excel. So can you kind of elaborate? I know you have a lot of experience in the food industry. What are some things that you see your customers and clients in the food industry starting to do to start tracking and hit some of those regulations that are coming down?
Yeah, so this is definitely a very hot topic. The Food Safety Modernization Act, which was put in place in order to track certain products on the food traceability list, like leafy vegetables,
Hmm.
fin fish, ready-made salads, you name it. There's a lot of things on there, and it's really about how do I track the lot codes of where those products were grown, all the way through the supply chain. I always used to like to use the example of you're going to have to be able to, and I think it's 2026 now, you're going to
Hmm.
have to be able to track the lot code of the avocado as it goes through the supply chain, and it gets onto the your supermarket shelf. But also you have to check that avocado as it gets turned into guacamole. So if
Hmm.
there's a recall for lot number 1, 2, 3, 4 avocados that came out of California, you got to know that this guacamole was made with that, so you can pull that as well. And trying to do that with a spreadsheet is going to be almost near impossible.
Yep.
So my advice to the food company industry is number one, if you haven't started now with some of the things I'm going to say, you're behind.
Mm.
If you want to take a crystal ball, look at a similar industry in the pharma industry who's had 10 years to try and do this. They're still stumbling, and they're getting ready to go live with the end of the regulation here in November. So
Yep.
the first thing is you want to have a back-end ERP system where you can collect the GS1 standards for those products that you're moving through your system. So, if you're not familiar with GS1, the number one is I would reach out to gs1us.org and start getting some education. And I'm sure you at Scanco, you guys are familiar with those
Very.
those standards, and that's something that our customers need help with.
Yep.
A lot of times, I'll just keep using the term avocado, but there might be a legacy stock number for avocados, right? And the problem is that that's great, but that stock number is for that particular organization only. What GS1 does is it provides a global number to identify a particular item so that it can be tracked through. Because what you'll need to be able to do is you'll need to be able to take records and keep records of those different transactions so you can find those. So that's definitely where I would start, and
Yeah.
try to get your ERP systems and your tracking systems and the ability to communicate electronically different events with your up and downstream suppliers is a task that you probably underestimated. So that's certainly where I would start. And as far as capture, we're starting to see a lot of looks at even in small and medium businesses. You certainly have the ability to scan things and the 2D barcode that'll be required, and that can be done with a hand scanner, ring scanner, what have you. But I'll also start looking heavily if you have conveyance or products that are going online, you can use fixed industrial scanners as a
Mm.
sensing technology, or even RFID, depending on if it makes sense to be able to pull those items out is also important. And again, to surgically find those batches of avocados, RFID is something that can be used to do that. And I know sometimes small, medium-sized businesses think, it's too expensive. But hey, Walmart is one of the biggest and most frugal companies in the world, and if they're putting RFID labels on packages of underwear, you should start looking into it.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. So for the longest time, we've always had an RFID capabilities, but we haven't really had a huge adoption. And I
Hmm.
would say probably in the last year and a half, 2 years, they're just coming out of nowhere and saying, hey, either our vendors or somebody is requiring RFID, and it's like, okay, now we can have that conversation. So, it's
Right.
definitely something I think from a head trash standpoint that a lot of companies think, hey, we can't afford it, it's too expensive, but it's way more
Hmm.
common in the last couple of years than I've ever seen it, being here, over
Yeah.
5.5 years. So it's
Yeah.
definitely something.
The technology's improved, I'd say, in the last 2, 3, 4 years, matured greatly, and then the cost of the ongoing, labels has decreased quite a bit as well.
Yep. And we could probably talk RFID for the next 15 to 20 minutes as well as GS1. Um, I know
Right.
for me, I talk to companies that you would think are using GS1, very large, well-known companies, and they're not, and you're just like a little scratch of the head. But we are at running close on time, so I want to kind of move over to some of the keys to achieving sustainable success. So, implementing systems like this is important, but how do we continue to succeed and how do we continue to grow is really the basis of my question. What have you seen? Hey, we've implemented a system, or maybe we're thinking about it, how do we get to where we want, but also how do we get to eventually a 4 or 5 year plan?
Yeah. So I think, if you think about this as a maturity model,
Hmm.
phase one and phase two is where we see worker initiated transactions. So that may be data entry. Again, I'll use the example of if a pallet gets put into I receive a pallet off a truck. How do I
Hmm.
let my backend system know that I have those assets visible? That may
Okay.
be writing a bunch of those transactions down on a clipboard and then, eventually putting those into the system. Well, if my ERP system or planning systems don't know that it's there, then that slows down the whole process. So that's
Hmm.
really where to start. That's where barcoding and mobile devices come into play. But I think looking down the road, if I can, use more sensor-based technology with maybe fixed industrial scanners along a conveyance, or even like you said, RFID set, that's where I think your longer term solution would be. And again, it all goes under the big phrase, it depends, right? It depends on where your customer wants to be now
Hmm.
and where they want to be in the next 3 to 5 years. Where do they want to be in the market? And then, between Scanco and Zebra, we can partner with them and give them some really good insight as far as, what that near, mid, and long-term plan should be.
Yep. Yeah, and I think partner is the right word there. So, I think it's really important whether it's Zebra and Scanco or Zebra and someone else to really talk with whoever your software provider is and come up with a strategy and let them know, hey, I want to be here for 4 or 5 years. Can you do this? Is this a capability that you actually have? And if it is, to have that open dialogue back and forth, whether you're meeting on a quarterly or yearly basis to have those conversations, or you're building that plan ahead of time. Whoever you're talking to, just make sure that that is something they can do, because the last thing you want to do is invest in a technology in 5 years where they say, hey, it's not something we can do. I think
Right.
that's super important, whether it's, like I said, no matter who the vendor is at that point.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
something else that kind of you struck me on there is, when product comes in, so like a pallet comes in, we're strictly talking about distribution right now. This is kind of inventory movement, but I know you have a strong background in manufacturing. Can you just give me a quick, I'm kind of throwing this a little curveball. Can you give me a quick kind of 2 minute snippet of how manufacturers can also take advantage of, utilizing some of this technology? Again, I know it's a little bit of a curveball today, John.
Yeah, no, I think, it comes about to, if I'm a manufacturer and I'm going to build widgets, right?
Hmm.
There's a planning process that happens that says, all right, on Thursday of next week, I'm going to build 10 widgets. Well,
Hmm.
that is easier said than done, right? You got to make sure that you procured, from your tier one or tier two suppliers. Let's talk about automotive. That
Hmm.
you have the right parts, the right assemblies that are there at the right time. And not only did I receive that in, but is it by the line, right? Is it ready for me to actually assemble? And I think that's where, our scanning of those those items, those assets. And I always use the 4 R's. Is the right asset, is it the right, is it in the right place at the right time, and is it in the right condition? And I think that's
Mm,
the thing that we have to keep in mind is that, again, if I don't know that those assemblies or those parts have come in because somebody forgot to enter them in, then guess what happens when you get ready to build those widgets on Thursday? You're missing something, and then now all of a sudden you have people standing around and you're scrambling to find, why something happened. So I
hmm.
think, that's even, more important as we look at, some of the, the manufacturing industry, which, we're doing a lot of heavy, in-depth, collaboration in as well.
Yeah, and the reason I bring that up is I see a lot of manufacturers in the conversation or in here right now, and I know for me
Mhm.
one of the biggest things that I hear is, I have product physically here, it's not in my system, so the production managers or supervisors, they just can't plan for it. They look in at their inventory and they're saying, hey, where is it? And people are grabbing stuff physically, but nothing's being scanned because nothing is being, talking about your analogy earlier, cutting that umbilical cord, nothing is connected with whatever
Right.
their backend system is. So that's why I bring that up. I thought it was relevant in this particular situation. So we
Absolutely.
are kind of coming up to the end point. I do want to wrap this up. So I guess from your standpoint, John, I think we've had a lot of good conversation here. But do you have any final words? Do you have anything to say? Specifically talking small to medium businesses. Think paper and pencil, Excel. Any final words that we can talk about or consider when undergoing this kind of technology integration?
I think the biggest thing is a lot of times when we get in these customers, whatever size they are, a lot of times the leadership has been doing the same thing for 20 years, right? And
Hmm.
some of these changes are foreign and maybe a little uncomfortable. I think if you work with Scanco and Zebra as a partner, we can kind of help you, with that change management as well, and just give you some education. Don't go all in on one technology. Kind of dip your toe in the water, and
Hmm.
do some initial, implementations. Like you said, if receiving is a pain point, then see if you can apply a technology there. And going from the paper and pen, to more of a mobile device is a big jump for a lot of folks. So if you just dip your toe in the water and kind of get that going and get that initial integration done and get those jitters out of the way, then what's going to happen is your leadership and your team is going to become more comfortable, and they're going to say, "Wow, this worked really well there. Can I use this for picking also? Can I use it to stage? Can I use it for shipment? How do I, kind of expand the value of those devices and those technologies?"
Yep. Yeah, and I would echo that. I think from me, kind of as a wrap up of my final thoughts is if you are on the fence, if you're someone who has been pushing this project, a project like this down the line, think to yourself, as John said, you're going to be behind the eight ball very soon. It's not just food. It's not just pharmaceuticals that have these regulations. Everything is being regulated. And in a year when we're looking at this and you're having this conversations, you're already going to be a year behind. So definitely think about it, talk with your management team and start to, see how we can start to scale or have these conversations. But we are at time today, about a minute, or we're right on time. I do want to open it up. If you have any questions, I'm happy to stay a couple minutes after to answer any questions. If not, you're welcome to jump on. I will be sending this out to everyone as well as you'll probably get a phone call or follow up from me. So kind of prepare for that. But I want to open it up to questions if there's any questions that come through. If not, we'll kind of end it. But I do appreciate, John, your time. I appreciate the audience's time today, and I hope it was beneficial. I know it was beneficial for me.
Yeah, I think it was a great conversation, Seth. And again, thank you and thanks Scanco for inviting me, and look forward to partnering as we go forward and again helping our customers become more efficient and gain traction in their marketplace.
Absolutely. All right. I do have one question for me that just popped up. How does Scanco, so John, I'll give you a break. How does Scanco collect some of this GS1 information and uh, some of these lots that John talked about? So, we have some additional pieces that Scanco offers. So most of the companies here, John, so you know, is Sage 100, and we have some additional vendor lot and lot traceability pieces to add into here. So that's conversation is I can call out to whoever ask that and we can have a deeper dive. All right, I don't think there's any other questions.
Okay,
So
great.
I am going
Thanks.
to, again, thank you, John. Everyone, enjoy the rest of your day, and I look forward to speaking with each and every one of you.